Now, we next have a panel on resilience, international cooperation, deep tech. No country is an island, no city can stand alone. And what's interesting about this panel on resilience is that we've got a Taiwanese company, AHP Tech. Martin Chen, general manager from there, would you like to come up to the stage? What's interesting about that, Taiwan, of all the countries, really knows about resilience. Kelly Richdale, Senior Advisor to Sandbox and Quantum Fellow at the World Economic Forum. Daniel Twitchen, Chief Technologist at Element 6. And Laurie Thorpe, Quantum Safe Industry Lead at IBM.
Hi, everybody. Wonderful to have you here. I'm Emmanuel Casemaris from SAP, and I'm very honored to be able to host a very nice panel today. First, I wanted to say a few thank you words for hosting us in such a beautiful venue, to our Lord Mayor. I wanted to thank you, Karina Robinson, for all that you're organizing. And I want to thank everybody in the room, because you all care about these topics, and you're all involved in some sort of fashion to either AI or quantum. So big thank you, and maybe just to introduce the panel, and Karina already introduced our guests, and I'll be sitting down. As you know, my role as the chair is to ask the questions and get interesting answers, but I would love it if we made it also interactive in the room. And so I thought I would just start with two questions, and apologies for my voice, which unlike the Lord Mayor, this is not because I'm speaking too much, but it's because of the travel. But maybe two first questions. Who has quantum as a top priority, or let's say priority 1, 2, or 3 in the current activities of the organization or personal, by a show of hands? Okay. Same question with AI now. Great, so about 50-50. And who has both quantum and AI as a top priority? Great, super. And maybe just as a short introduction, so I'm responsible at SAP for an offering called Locally Hosted AI, which interestingly comes at a nice junction between quantum and AI. And the title of our panel is about resilience and international collaboration, which of course SAP is in the middle of, and especially locally hosted AI, which is an offering where we put the software and the AI in a secure environment locally for our 400,000 customers, is at the center of this. But here I stop the introduction, and we have a number of interesting questions. We will be getting questions from you as well, so please don't hesitate. Kelly, I thought I would start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your view on quantum and why we need PQC? And please tell us what PQC is about.
So I think one of the deals on conferences like this is we generally try to throw in as many acronyms as possible. And the test is at the end if you've understood any of them. There's a lot of Q acronyms today and a lot of AI acronyms that you'll come across as well. So why quantum? Well, as Michael said in the previous talk, quantum is here today. And quantum is a concept. It is generically describing 3 separate streams as we normally separate them: quantum computing, quantum communications, and quantum sensing. And there are particular areas where each of them are at different areas, at different TRL levels. What we see is that quantum computing is coming up, and it will have an impact on today's security protocols. More specifically, there is Shor's algorithm, a quantum algorithm, which is waiting for a quantum computer, a quantum hardware sufficiently powerful to run it. That to date does not exist, we think. But once it does, it will be able to crack today's asymmetric encryption algorithms. More specifically, those are the algorithms that are used for the establishment of trust, authentication, etc. The confidentiality protocols like AES are currently believed to be quantum safe. So when you hear today quantum safe or quantum resistant, we're talking about those kind of mathematical algorithms typically which are resistant to these attacks by quantum computers. And there are more attacks that are under testing. This is underlying, the encryption algorithms underlie every single aspect of our digital trust, and so attacking them will allow not just access to financial services, but also to undermine the privacy and sovereignty of any nation state. So this is pretty high stakes. When we talk about post-quantum cryptography, we're talking specifically about mathematical protocols, many of which have been standardized by NIST. There are other countries who are undergoing different standardization endeavors, but which are resistant to attacks by quantum computers. And specifically, there are two threats. One is the attack today for the long-term confidentiality of data today, because you can download information, and then once a quantum computer comes up that can run Shor's algorithm, you can then decrypt it. More specifically, there's also the attack when there's a quantum computer on authentication protocols, which means that you can attack everything from my wallet on the blockchain for Bitcoin to the interfaces between a bank and the data center to the methods of authentication used again by nation states. So fairly important. There's also, just to throw in the mix, a quantum response to quantum attacks, which is called quantum key distribution or quantum networking. And this uses quantum phenomena in today's world, single photons, the exchange of single photons over optical fibers or free space, which are also resistant to quantum attacks. And you can say that that's quantum fighting quantum. So that's a tiny bit the landscape about the resilience questions that we're facing today, specifically around security.
So this is serious then?
I would say pretty serious, yes, even with British understatement.
Kelly, do you want to tell us your view? Is it serious? Or Daniel, if you want, please.
Sorry, me. So that's the key thing, yeah? So let's assume everything you care for, everything that's secret, government, your private life, is being recorded right now. And if you believe some of the technology roadmaps, a quantum computer in the not too distant future, 5 to 10 years, will be able to decode all of that information. So that's like an urgent need. You want to be the first with the tech, and Michael represents that through the NQCC in part. And secondly, you want to start to de-risk your supply chain, which is where the security comes in, the networking. How can I send messages and then be safe against a future quantum computer hack? I think the key thing is, and this is why it's so much of a challenge, is the physics is still not clear. So it's still really hard physics to solve, and the business models are still also not clear. And in part, that's why it's so important that startup, academia, large industry, and governments work together, because it's not clear how we together, no single type of institution can actually take the type of steps you need to understand this and actually de-risk it. And that's why it's so important, this type of community, your government, startup, large companies, it's only together that we stand a chance of being actually at the head of this.
Kelly, you want to comment? Or Laurie?
So with some of these new technologies that are rapidly evolving, we need to be thinking about security from the start, and we need to be thinking about how we introduce them in a way that is secure and how we ensure that there is equitable access to these technologies if we really want to be able to leverage the potential of the technologies as a society. So I think when we talk about PQC, when we talk about quantum safe, we need to be looking at ultimately in the context of a wider security landscape. In a few years' time, it won't be quantum safe. It'll either be safe or it won't. There is a responsibility now that we look at how quantum safe goes hand in hand with quantum, and what do we need to do to coordinate to ensure that it is implemented. This isn't something that we want to go and retrofit afterwards. First of all, because it will be too late. Second of all, because it will be prohibitively expensive. So when we talk about quantum safe, when we talk about sort of, even in AI, I mean, we've been talking about sort of the risk of quantum. AI brings risks. Ultimately, all of these technologies, all of these powerful technologies have the potential to be misused, and we need to be managing that. We need to be managing that as an ecosystem. This is nothing that any single company can do. From an IBM perspective, obviously we're building quantum computers, we're building the full stack. We are now at a point where this is becoming a lot more real and a lot more relevant for many, many more people than it was before. So this is moving from something that was accessible to a very small community of people, potentially in labs, to where anybody can use a quantum computer. So we've got quantum on the cloud, and we've got ever more powerful quantum computers available. We need to make sure that we're also protecting ourselves. And when we talk about protection against quantum, we are really looking at the foundations of our digital society. So cryptography underpins our digital society, our digital economy. Not doing that will be disastrous.
Martin, you come from Taiwan, which is a very specifically positioned country at the forefront of technology, and at the same time in a very peculiar and interesting geopolitical situation. What is your view on the acceleration of quantum and AI?
Okay, my pleasure to be here. My company, Apitech, and I myself are based in Taiwan. As you know, we Taiwanese usually have a focused mindset on the topic of resilience. So, very happy to have a communication with you on this. Okay, return to the question itself. At present, if a quantum-driven threat comes to the real world, we'll believe that the current crypto key systems may not be safe in reason, since the legacy crypto key system could be cracked within a reasonable time slot through a brute forcing attack driven by a quantum computer. Thus, to address such an issue, there comes the requirement to prepare so-called quantum resilience. Since the industry of quantum computing is raising up now, NIST, which is the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, has specified some PQC algorithms which can extend the required time consumption to a significant level for resisting a quantum-driven threat. In some perspective, if a system is able to resist a brute forcing attack for a very long period, such as weeks, months, or even years, wherein the attack is powered by a quantum computer, we can treat that as quantum resilience, kind of. Hence, we usually think natively the proper timing to introduce PQC will depend on the progress of quantum computer. However, the viewpoint on the progress of quantum computer may be quite divergent. To bypass some pointless argument, many advisors raise the viewpoint of HNDL attack for reminding companies to upgrade their protection from now on. HNDL means harvest now, decrypt later. This idea actually works for some specific cases, but unexpectedly, they may make some CISOs have a lucky mentality, since their sensitive data could be outdated before the real quantum-driven threat comes. They may not be in the position of CISO when it comes as well. In the end, we find seldom positioned persons who care about this topic urgently. In fact, a hidden risk is that The AI era has come before the future of quantum computer. Very few organizations sense the AI-driven threat powered by HPCs. Here the word in HPC, that I mean in high-performance computers. As we expect, GB300, which is the powerful high-performance server promoted by NVIDIA, will sweep the world in 2026, and an all-new threatened ecosystem in cyber environment could become out as well. An AI-driven system will be able to guess your crypto key or vulnerability through its way and hit the target within a reasonable time slot. Its knowledge domain is out of conventional PQC. PQC standards specified by NIST definitely could help somewhat on extending the protection from conventional brute forcing attacks. However, when the threats driven by AI and quantum dance with each other, only relying on PQC standards may not be resilient enough. To counter the emerging threats driven by AI and quantum computing, we propose to introduce more innovative technologies from quantum computational properties as a hybrid solution for organizations who concern sustainability. Hope this answer helps you to consider the real threatened environment from a variety of perspectives. Thank you.
Kelly, and just before you comment, so we are in an interesting time. On the one hand, as usual, capital and innovation goes towards growth, right? And quantum is an area that, according to some studies, is probably worth 100 billion in a couple of years, right? And will continue growing. Yet at the same time, I hear from the panel that, let's not go too fast. We have some risks. We could have people download the data, then decrypt it later. So we need to, analyze the speed at which we go. Like, what is your view, and how do we ensure, through resilience and international cooperation, that we have security, protection, while maybe at the same time keeping some growth and investments in this area?
I think, so to come back, I think that's a really good segue into the response. There are always going to be technologies out there, and what I really appreciated was the talk about technology convergence, how you get compounding technologies which converge to increase potential and innovation, but also which increase significantly the potential risk impact, both for companies and for countries. So just taking that, what I think is interesting is that post-quantum cryptography is an example where the world has come together, like-minded nations have come together, the regulators have done, I think, an exceptionally good job, including here in the UK, the FCA and others, in driving a regulatory approach which is clear, proportional, and well coordinated with other nations in order to make companies aware of the risks and to drive PQC as a standard. And the bottom line is it doesn't really matter now whether you believe a quantum computer is around the corner, because that's still an area of much cynicism and much debate. But the bottom line is simply for a company to be compliant, you need to have a post-quantum adoption and migration strategy. And if you look at the timelines, approximately the like-minded nations, Europe, UK, US, Australia, New Zealand, etc., are all driving towards inventory. You need to do your cryptographic inventory now because you have to understand what is underlying. You can no longer assume that there's simply a black box out there. And then you need to plan your migration. The more sensitive systems and data have to be migrated by 2030, and then 2035 is the ultimate deadline. But this again talks to the need. This kind of regulation will have to be ongoing. What we see is the combination of AI and quantum. You have AI accelerating quantum and quantum accelerating AI. And I'd love to talk about some of the benefits afterwards outside of security, but the risk profile is significantly increasing as a result. I would say cybersecurity, in a sense, is almost the easiest one to regulate. I hate to say that, because there are very, very specific cyber standards out there. And you don't have to create new standards. What you do is you build on the existing standards for cryptographic hygiene, resilience. They need to be improved, definitely. We are at the end of having 70 years of the same cryptography. That's never going to happen again, ever. So another mandate is that companies need to have cryptographic agility built in because resilience and agility go hand in hand as new attack vectors come. But the attack vectors out there with AI and quantum are definitely going to get more interesting and more varied, and the attack surfaces increase dramatically.
I would maybe just challenge a bit there. I think true resilience comes from interdependency. And everything we're seeing pretty much in the world today is driving separation. I mean, the most extreme example is what you've seen in China. Yeah? Stopping that supply of those certain chips in 2019, China is now more resilient and robust and probably no longer needs the West in some of that high-tech semiconductor. So it's like any manager. They always say, when you put a control in place, think very hard before you put that control in place, because it's always hard to take controls away. So controls and regulations are really important, but they need to be proportionate. And I wonder at times whether we feel too safe when we put these in place. That you put them in place, but the key thing is what you're doing as a consequence of those. And that's really the key. Leadership will only come from speed and being first. And that's what I think we often miss when we talk about regulations. How is it going to make us faster, not as a position of fear, stopping the other guy?
But, I mean, regulation doesn't necessarily equate to action. And I think one of the things that we have seen here in the UK, the GCHQ and CSC have really taken a leadership role on the international stage in terms of putting the right guidelines in place. Now, between having a guideline and actually executing and being able to say, I am now quantum safe, there is sort of a huge gap. There's a lot that needs to be done. And I think a lot of that is actually playing out now on the international stage. We're seeing that there has been a level of cooperation. If we think even just of the NIST algorithms, if we think of the subsequent standardization that is happening, whether it's IETF, whether it's ETSI, in the financial services space, in the telco space, there is international cooperation taking place. One of the areas that maybe I wanted to highlight that is still a little bit of a question mark is around the investment that will be required to implement some of these things. And this is no different to many of the other investments that are required for ultimately to support cybersecurity going forward. But we know that this is something that is, first of all, unprecedented in terms of the complexity. We know that this is something that will be a multi-year process. So it is, in terms of orders of magnitude, this isn't something that we're going to be doing next Wednesday. This is an investment that will require potentially a 10-year cycle and a focus. And really, the guidelines are the starting point, very good starting point, but they're by no means the end point. And we need to be sort of cognizant of that and sort of keeping in mind that there's what we are doing now, and then, how do we get to the point where actually we've executed on some of these things and we've achieved the goal, which is to be developing technology, but to make sure that we're also safe from somebody misusing that technology.
And sorry, you mentioned cost there. So I'm going to show you something. Anybody know what that is? So that's actually a diamond wafer. So that's a lump of diamond. And this diamond is being used today for quantum sensing, quantum networking, actually quantum computing. I see one of the guys in the back of the room that's actually working on building a quantum computer on the back of this diamond. We're a medium-sized company. We've been in the UK. We were founded about 70 years ago, developing advanced diamond for lots of deep tech applications, from lasers to detectors for high-energy physics, and now quantum. Medium-sized company, the cost we have to deal with, dealing with export controls, legal regulations, it all comes off the bottom line, and it only slows us down. And we're a medium-sized company, so what does that mean for a startup? So in many ways, it only favors that US model where you've got a large company you can come and buy in cheap.
I think that's really interesting because we talked about quantum safe security and post-quantum cryptography, but it's a much broader topic. And you talked about resilience coming from interdependency. I mean, Element 6 is part of the quantum supply chain and much of the quantum supply chain is now being hit by tariffs, by export controls of not being able to export some of the critical elements to certain non-aligned countries. And I think that's it's a relatively blunt instrument which is being used to try to control access to leading technologies, whether it's high-performance compute, AI, or the future quantum computing. And I think we have a really interesting dilemma, and there's no easy answer, but is it global resilience versus sovereign resilience? And that is a critical question, I think, for the UK. We're sitting in the UK today. UK is also caught in some ways between Europe and America, well situated in some ways. But you do look at the, much of today, and if we look at deep tech, it has huge benefits from network effects, from access to platforms of data. We look at the effects of the AI LLMs. They have massive benefits of having capital investment from the US. We look at future quantum computers. Many of the quantum computers are based out of the US. What does that mean for access to the quantum computers? What does that mean for future access for Britain or for the global South, who may have no access at all? And are we really building in resilience if we're increasing this digital divide? I think one of the things I find most interesting, and I'm sitting on both sides of the Atlantic debate, is that what we see in America is the level of investment into deep tech is so significantly greater than anywhere in the UK or Europe. It's not simply a case of having less regulation. Yes, there is less regulation. There are fewer guardrails, because this is seen now to be acting not in a time of war, but we're not in a time of peace. And so during those critical geopolitical turns, the regulation is the last thing that countries think about in their own defense. What we do see, however, is that in America, it's not just the level of investment into deep tech, but it's also the multiples that you get. And if you look at the way the technologies develop, early technologies start up with small technologies, and they get acquired by platforms. And the fact that the US companies have massive multiples means that their war chest for acquiring smaller startups and SMEs is much greater. Let's look at the case of IonQ acquiring Oxford Ionics and company where I worked previously, ID Quantic in Switzerland. Just with the multiples they have, it doesn't even have to be, and now we're talking more generically, it doesn't even have to be a cash deal, it can be an equity deal. But the force of the centrifuge of pulling companies into, and the startups into America onto these huge American-run platforms is massive. And these, particularly in the area of quantum computing, that is where the aggregation, the transversality and multidisciplinarity of the technology means that you do have huge benefits from bringing all of these startups together. So just to say, I really think that the UK and Europe specifically needs to think about their sovereignty, their technology sovereignty. We cannot outsource that. Yes, we do need to have interdependency, but there also has to be a level of technology sovereignty that the UK holds on critical infrastructure and on these critical technologies. And that means a lot more investment and easier investment through pension funds, etc., into local deep tech companies.
Daniel, can you tell us again how you use the device you brought?
Sorry, how you
use what you brought?
So we talk about deep tech, and most of you are aware diamonds are typically grown deep in the earth, about 100 miles below the Earth's surface. So they generally are deep tech natural diamonds. Synthetic diamonds you actually make via, similar to how the Earth does its, reject graphite to high temperatures and pressures. But a technique that UK pioneered and the leaders in is you can grow it by a fancy microwave oven. Get the chemistry right, put enough power into your microwave oven, and you can grow plates of diamond. And diamond is a very clean lattice, so you can actually engineer spins into the material, and these spins are quantum spins, and you can control and engineer them at room temperature. So one of the things that people are excited by diamond as a quantum platform is it's potentially the only platform relevant for sensing, networking, and quantum computing, but also, because of some of the fancy physics, the thing can work at room temperature. So it can be a very small device. So we're talking about interdependencies. So we recognize we make fancy diamond. Over the years, we talked about becoming a sensor company, but what do we really know about making sensors? So recently, we've entered into a JV with Bosch, and they bring all of that semiconductor know-how, how to make sensors in scale, to integrate with diamond. So the opportunity for us in Europe is bringing the best of diamond with the best of making sensors, solve that integration problem, and Europe should be in a strong position. I actually just came from a show yesterday in Stuttgart where the final deal was announced, and one of the things we showed there, to give you a sense for a real example application outside of quantum computing, is sensing. Heart disease is still one of the biggest killers. The problem with heart disease, you only detect it too late, and then it's remedial action. So you'd like low-cost, early heart disease detection. So every time you went to the doctor, he could, for example, she could just do a quick test to check any issues with the heart. The heart emits magnetic signals. So if you can measure magnetic fields sensitively, you can actually pick up early-stage heart disease. So actually, we showed on the stand yesterday a diamond sensor detecting the signals from a heart. Now, the dual use of that is defense. So now I want to navigate, but I don't want to navigate relying on GPS. I want to navigate via magnetic anomalies, changes in the Earth's field or dynamics in this building. So that sensor is a platform potentially for power for good, but also a power that actually enhances our defense characteristics. So again, a company like us, medium-sized company, how do we navigate our way through that is by effective partnership.
And what I'd maybe say is that Sandbox AQ, AI and Quantum, Sandbox AI and Quantum does both the magnetic cardiograms using the nitrogen vacant diamond seas and also MagNav, so magnetic navigation. And what you have there is you have the nitrogen vacancy diamonds, which sense very small changes in the Earth's electromagnetic field thanks to the crustal field of the Earth. And you can navigate like whales or birds do. And of course, you need very high performance AI running on top of it to take out the noise of the aircraft engines, etc. But back to the topic, this builds in resilience because there are systematic GPS attacks linked with Ukraine and specifically in the defense area where you need to be able to navigate without GPS. And so magnetic navigation is one of the areas that can build resilience in the defense sector and then eventually in the commercial sector.
And it's very interesting how this topic is coming at the center of so many topics, from defense to economic growth to employment to resilience and international cooperation. So we've understood it's a serious topic. I think maybe a call to action to the audience here is that you're all agents of change, and we're all specialists to some extent in this room, but this topic is a big topic, and I don't think the public or general public has it in mind. So the call for action to you is to spread the word around how important it is to think of the right structure for the growth of AI and quantum in the coming years, for all that you mentioned. And I just want to touch again on something you mentioned around interventionism from countries. Are you calling for more interventionism from the UK, the European Union, France, Germany, and countries and international organizations, or less? Because you made the point on both ends, right? There's a part around you want to be putting the structure, the legal structure, the company structure to protect the data, and at the same time you want to have a region that can, and region means also the world for Taiwan, can go fast and not be left behind the key technologies.
So again, coming back to the market bit, because in the end it's the markets that will determine whether we're successful or not. The markets at the moment are still too small and too uncertain. So for a company like us, a component in a supply chain, you need access to all of those markets to even begin to make an NPV case. So anything that limits that, limits your investment case. I think the other glowing trend we're seeing increasingly, and pressures on us as well, is everybody wants local supply. So you want to replicate what you're doing in the UK, in Europe, in the US, in South Korea. That comes at a cost, yeah? I'd much sooner be spending that money on R&D than building another factory for local supply. And you know, some of the other players, and there are some very impressive competitors out there, especially in China, with a much more vertically integrated investment case, they're not doing that. So if we're not careful, the West is making this more expensive and adding more time if we don't drive that. Don't replicate, we've got to work together to solve it.
Martin, what's the situation right now in Taiwan? How do companies cooperate? How does the government cooperate and, you know, foster innovation while controlling it?
Without answering this question directly, I would like to provide a perspective based on the viewpoint of data ownership. Yeah, our developers implement container technology on AWS, and that helps our platform to be provisioned in different locations without additional efforts. And AWS can fit compliance in most of locations all over the world based on the requirement from enterprises. For example, AWS supports different policies for its data centers in Dubai and France. Besides, we adopt in-memory database secure storage in our backend, and that makes the stored data cannot be grasped through any physical disk. Moreover, the technology of key-morphing and data clocking, which is the implementation of our US patents, will force the encrypted data to be decrypted in a specific data center only and assures that any stolen data cannot be decrypted successfully outside the specific data centers. In a brief conclusion, container technology for flexible provisions, cloud infrastructure with local compliance, and the non-endpoint medium for secure storage and deep tech for data protection are elements of baseline to defend your data ownership, no matter nationally or non-nationally. And that tells our AQCCP, which is our quantum computing cloud platform, has provided much more than resilience on it. Excuse me to have a bit promotion for our services. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I think I really like what the chair said at the last panel. There's a time to make a decision and not keep experimenting. And if you like, Taiwan in some ways is an exemplar of that. 30 years ago, made a decision to be very good at one thing and now dominate and lead the world in that. And no manager, no government ever likes to say no to something. But actually, probably the hardest but the most important thing this community does is say no to some things, but make sure we do one or two things very well. And I don't quite know how we're going to do that, because we all want money, we all want to support our different technologies, but probably for success, that the issue is what do we say no to?
I just wanted to go back to your question around, do we need more regulation? Do we need more rules? Do we need more guidance? I'm not sure I have a direct answer to that, but I think one thing I would say in the context of resilience and security, I mean, I come from a telco background. Regulation in telco traditionally equals cost. That was sort of the view. You know, you kind of equate it to dollar signs. we need to look at what's been happening lately. So if we think of M&S, what happened recently with M&S, if we think of Salt Typhoon a few months ago in the US, ultimately security needs to be not just considered, this is just an extra cost. We need to start looking at it as table stakes. Now, where does regulation play a role, or where does guidance play a role? I think we need to be looking at the disparity between large companies and small companies. I think to the point that you made, do small companies have the same capabilities that a Google or an IBM will have? And I think that's where regulation and where governments need to play a role in basically minimizing or mitigating that divide. So if we go back to the PQC question, because I think that's a very good example, where governments play a role is in making some of these capabilities more accessible, making things clearer. So even being able to provide clarity and provide guidance on what is the best way to tackle a problem. In the case of PQC, again, going back to what NCSC has been doing, following their guidance means that actually the impact of implementing something like PQC, which is going to be really critical for security going forward, it means that you do it a lot cheaper. It means that you do it, you can manage the investment over a longer period of time, but also that you do it a lot more efficiently because you can start to manage your supply chain from today. So that's not something where you need to wait. You can do this from starting now. You can start looking at your inventory. You can start protecting your assets. You can start managing, the data. I mean, once the data is stolen, it's gone. There's not really much you can do about it, but you can start earlier, and it can make it a lot more efficient. So what that means is that regulation plays a role in somehow democratizing the ability to manage this threat.
I'd love to add on to that as well. So I think whether you are a company or a country, there is always this tension between innovation and risk management. And I'm on a number of boards of listed companies, and all AI innovation measures that are put in place and in the future quantum move over to the operational risk committee to understand how to put in and enforce controls appropriate to those innovations. So you cannot ever have one without the other. Now, if you're looking at government policy, you have the same challenge. Governments need to support local startups. They need to support their deep tech sector. They need to ensure that there is free finance flowing to support their own sovereign capabilities. And they also need to make sure that there is as few regulations as possible for early stage companies until the latest possible TRL. So regulation should be the final choice, not the early easy choice. And it should be done as far along the TRL as possible and be proportional, adaptive, etc. And PQC is a very good example of where I think that has been implemented well. On the other hand, if we look at the range of new technology challenges that are upcoming, think about quantum computing. I mean, quantum computing has the unbelievable capacity to create new materials. Through the understanding of underlying physics, quantum physics algorithms, quantum chemistry, you can make new energy materials, you can design personalized drugs and medications that will potentially cure cancer, etc. Now think of the downside of that. What can you do with that if it gets into the wrong hands in the asymmetric threats that arise from either massive cybersecurity attacks or potentially more serious attacks, whether they're linked with weapons of mass destruction, personalized poisons, etc. And there is no easy answer to that. I've heard some interesting debates starting about that. If you take the financial model of know your customer, who are we going to allow onto the financial system to ensure that we're not financing terrorism, for example? You have to know your customer, KYC. And I've heard thought about having KY3C for quantum computers, know your customer, know your cloud, and know your content. But then if you think about the impact that that has, we have a financial system where we have disenfranchised 2 billion people in the world who don't have access to financial solutions because we have put in place this very stringent regulation. So does that mean on the quantum side that we're then going to have this quantum divide where the global south won't have any access to it at all? How do you ensure that they have access to the benefits? So I'm sorry to leave you with a quandary and a paradox, but there is really, there are some real challenges coming ahead as the technology develops.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these very important questions. I think, you know, as we say, there's a phrasing in French, or I don't know if it's in English, that says that once you raise the question in the right way, you have answered it half or 50% of it. So I think this is what we're doing today. We have an avalanche of questions, which is probably a good sign. At the same time, I see the counter, which is 1 minute. So I will take one question. I apologize. And I will take the person who had the courage to put his name and the organization. So Luis from Accelera is asking, do you see, because it's all the others are anonymous. That's why I'm. So I prefer taking the one that has put his name. And the question is, how do you see the role of large European tech in promoting the sovereign European ecosystem through partnerships and investments? And we have 20 seconds to answer. So I'll just, on my end, through my knowledge of SAP, just say that it's a responsibility. I think this is one word that is important here that I think we share all among the audience and on the panel. All the subjects that we've mentioned, whether we are for more regulation, more interventionism, more free market, more innovation, all these questions, it's a responsibility. And I propose we just finish the panel with one last word from each panelist, maybe starting left to right. Daniel?
So I think I'll follow from the previous panel. Quantum deep tech is here, deep tech is here, and it's diamond.
I'm not sure I can beat that. No, I think that the fact that we've covered a number of different really important topics, and I think the fact that there is this conversation happening is really good, because I think that for a lot of these things there isn't an easy answer, but we can make sure that there's awareness of it and that we're planning ahead as much as we can. So I think this sort of conversation and narrative is very useful.
I would build on that, agree with that, and I think the participation of all parts of the ecosystem in coming to a solution of walking this rather delicate tightrope between innovation and regulation, or guardrails, as I prefer to think of them, is key. So, and that involves everything from the deep tech startups through to the venture capital and PE companies, through to the government, through to the regulators, and particularly the role of industry in bringing this awareness in each specific vertical industry and how it will impact your industry and what you can do to ensure risk, operational risk management linked with those innovations.
Okay, I think technology can solve most questions today, but compliance could be the issue. For transnational cooperation, we should concern the compliance issue more. But at present, we still think a cloud platform we all have more opportunity to overcome the compliance issue to solve such kind of problems. Yeah.
Thank you, and I will add, but maybe agreeing with what was said. Again, responsibility. We're all agents of change here, and everybody in the room, and also outside. And in thinking of this relationship between speed and control. We go fast, but we need to control the growth of speed and the speed of growth. Thank you so much. It was so interesting to hear you. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much for the organization. And looking forward to the next panels. Thank you.